Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Neurodiverse Artists and Practitioners Discussing How They Work with Digital. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator today. I'm going to explain the plan for today and what you can expect from this morning. This webinar is brought to you by The Space in collaboration with Move Beyond Words. The Space is a digital agency established by Arts Council England and the BBC to help promote digital engagement across the arts and cultural sector. And this slide gives you a sense of the breadth of work that we do and the different artists and organisations that we've worked with. And so our webinars are really based on case studies and examples of what people do in real life. As part of this work, this year, the BBC commissioned 12 deaf, neurodivergent and disabled artists to produce new films and audio works. And The Space, along with Unlimited, are working with those artists to provide an executive producer and mentors for the productions, which will be available on BBC platforms in the autumn. This next slide is showing you our D symbol. So as it says, The Space are committed to creating a platform where everyone can learn in a way that suits them. And we developed this icon in collaboration with Move Beyond Words. And it's not to say that this webinar is specifically about or for people with dyslexia, but in one of the ways in which we are thinking about creating a platform for everyone, this webinar represents the steps that we've taken to welcome people with dyslexia. And at the end of the webinar, there will be an evaluation, as there always is. And we'd be very grateful for your ideas on what you've heard and seen, and also what else we can do to make these series as accessible as possible. Our panelists today, we have a fantastic group of panelists. So we've choreographers and people from the dance world. So Elizabeth Arafine and Charlotte Edmonds, who run Move Beyond Words, and they'll tell you a bit about their organisation in a minute. And Corey Baker, another choreographer, so really bringing that world to us today. And Andrew Hugill is a composer, a musicologist and a creative technologist. So he works with music and more broadly with digital technologies. And Becky Morris works in the arts and heritage sector, advising on how to make collections and work more accessible. So we've got a fantastic mix of people from different sectors, and I think that sharing across those sectors will be really important. And also each of our panelists has their own neurodiverse profile, and they're speaking from a very specific point of view. And again, we'll all learn from those different perspectives. Before we get into the programme, just a few things that might help you to understand how the webinar works and what we use. So as well as what happens on screen and our panellists talking, we use the chat function quite a lot. It's a way of people connecting to each other and adding contributions and conversation as we go along. And the panellists will join that conversation in chat when they're not on the screen. And you can also use that chat to ask questions of our panellists when they're speaking, and also maybe of one another. If you don't want to write a question directly into chat that everybody can see, you can send it to Angela. So Angela Hughes is our Space comms manager, and she'll put the question forward for you if you'd like to. And if you have any problems or technical questions, you can ask our technical team, who are also in the chat. We don't have any PowerPoints apart from the introduction. Our speakers don't have any PowerPoints, so there's none of that to be shared, but we are recording this session, so it will be available on our YouTube channel for 6 months after the event if you wanted to go back and look at it again. And we also have Claire with us today. Claire is our live captioner, and if captions would be helpful to you, you can go to the live transcript button at the bottom of the screen and turn the captioning on. Okay, so just an overview of what happens. I've been through the introductions and how we work. Then we've got 2 panel discussions, and we'll hear from each of our contributors in turn. And there will be time for you to ask questions. So the first panel will be Charlotte and Elizabeth and Andrew and Corey discussing how they work digitally. Then we'll have a short break. And then the second panel will introduce Becky, and Andrew will also discuss with Becky some of his work, which is really thinking about what organisations can do to become more accessible for a neurodivergent audience and artists. And all the way along, there's opportunity for you to ask questions, and then a final session when we'll come back together. Okay, so that's how we work and what's going to happen. So my next task is to introduce Charlotte Edmonds and Elizabeth Arifin from Move Beyond Words. So I'm going to ask them to unmute themselves and turn their cameras on. And just, do you want to start, Charlotte and Elizabeth, by introducing yourselves? And they're going to set the scene, really, give us a bit of perspective of why they think this is important work. So over to you.
Thanks, Linda. I'm Elizabeth Arifin, and I dance with the labels of dyslexia and ADD. I'm in my office today, which is a white plain room, and we've got slanted ceilings in here. Around 3 meters behind me, I've got a sofa, which is kind of blue and grey, and I'm wearing a burgundy turtleneck, which is a t-shirt with a black linen jacket over the top. And I have long brown mousy coloured hair. And for work, I'm a dance artist, choreographer, filmmaker, and creative producer. And I'm the founder of Creative Dance London and one half of Move Beyond Words with Charlotte Edmonds.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Edmonds. I'm the other half of Move Beyond Words, and I'm dyslexic. I'm also a dance artist and choreographer working predominantly with dance companies around the world to use art as an important source of expression through live and digital work. I'm based at home today as well, with a white wall behind me, wearing a black t-shirt, and I have bright blonde hair.
So we'd like to start by thanking the space for creating this conversation with us. And we're really grateful for the lengths that the team has gone through to make this an opportunity for learning on everyone's behalf. But before we do dive in, I'd like to just share what dyslexia is, as that's where our work is focused. And for those who are interested, if you were to Google what is dyslexia, you would get this answer from the NHS website. So dyslexia is a common learning difficulty that can cause problems with reading, writing, and spelling. It's a specific learning difficulty, which means it causes problems with certain abilities used for learning, such as reading and writing, as I've kind of demonstrated there with my stumbling. So dyslexia is an incredibly complex label and affects people in various ways and severities. And like all humans, we are unique, and one way of working with dyslexia doesn't suit everyone. I see dyslexia as a valuable neurological tendency when placed in an environment that encourages visionary skills, problem solving, complex pattern recognition, strategic thinking, empathy, keen-sightedness, and heightened sense of observation skills, among many other skill sets. They're the ones that are primarily connected to those who dance, not literally with the label of dyslexia. And like all labels, we can choose the meaning that we attach to them, and we must never forget that. Move Beyond Words was created to amplify the voices of dyslexic artists and support your journey in discovering your relationship to the label through stimulating conversations surrounding MBW's works, such as our podcast dance performances, both live and digital, and our workshops. When creating new works, we aim for dance organisations to question and consider changes which would allow working environments to become healthier and more productive for everyone involved. Move Beyond Words have been consulting dance organisations and artists through the pandemic on best practices and working with dyslexic creatives alongside making collaborative creative projects. We feel neurodivergent artists have gone unnoticed for the challenges that we face in our creative arts sector, and there has been a lack of real change. During my school years, myself and my peers were educated to believe that dyslexia was an issue. It was a condition, a disadvantage, and we were lacking something. But this is misinformation, and Move Beyond Words are addressing this in our creative works. And today we're taking one step in the right direction by holding this space, no pun intended, and discussing how neurodivergent artists and practitioners work with digital, and the ways digital can support us, especially during the last 18 months.
So Charlotte, just really to ask you the question, what have your observations been on how it's been during the last 18 months?
Yeah, it's been a real discovery, in all honesty, with someone who is dyslexic. But this question reminded me of what Sean Douglas said on our podcast. And he says, dyslexia is the world's toughest gym, which I think we can agree with. But that's because there's all these obstacles and changes and challenges that push you. But if you combat these challenges, you develop these extra muscles that make you stronger. And we can only speak on behalf of our own experiences today and share feedback that we've received from people that we've worked with who identify with dyslexia. But similarly to what Sean is saying, is that we've noticed that artists have developed these new muscles. And especially within the last 18 months, continue to find solutions through problem solving and being open to creating art in new ways, especially through a digital medium. Within this time, Move Beyond Words has connected with other neurodivergent artists and learned with them through creative projects which were predominantly online, like the creation of our pilot film Unboxed and our podcast, which we'll speak about in a bit more depth shortly. All these experiences presented challenges, especially when working in this new setting, but also new possibilities to creating digital whilst being remote. And when working remotely in the last 18 months, Elizabeth and I went beyond our artistic collaboration and formed Move Beyond Words as a community interest company to support people, particularly artists who identify with dyslexia. The pandemic prevented us and many others from performing publicly. So we turned to the digital space to continue moving forward and to try and strive to make a positive difference to the neurodivergent community. And as artists, we've been really interested during this time in how we can continue moving in a physical and metaphorical sense through the influence of art, dance, and digital background. But to summarize on this point, I think looking back and looking forward is so important. The past 18 months have allowed time and the opportunity to reflect on our methods, both personally and with organisations. But now we have the opportunity to implement change through research and discovery and execution for the benefit of artists and audiences.
Yeah. And Elizabeth, did you want to add anything really about your take on how the current landscape is?
I think for kind of neurodivergent artists, there's been kind of so many changes in the creative arts sector over the last 18 months, and you know, particularly for artists having to adapt their way of working. Mm-hmm. And I do feel that people are listening and open to change, but we as neurodivergent people don't have all the answers. We've been incredibly challenged for some time. And I hope as we move forward, we can do it openly and honestly together, and by providing safe spaces for conversations to occur around best practice. Yeah. From personal experiences, Move Beyond Words can see that students in particular need support in the transition phase from dance schools to professional working environments. And therefore, we are designing workshops that will initially provide tools for students to move more confidently into the professional dance sector. And we'll include physical resources as well when designing the workshops. And in time, we'd like to design workshops for kind of people in leadership roles who can work with us on providing best solutions for their co-workers and people that they're working with, so that we can have cohesive work environments And, you know, we're all neurodiverse, and it's important that we take time to understand one another's strengths and weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've talked a lot about thinking about support, and that's what you do, and adapting. And we wanted really to move into the making of the work. So how you use digital to make work. And I wanted you've done a couple of things, haven't you? You've worked at, as you talked about, unboxed your film and the podcast. So can we start with the podcast and thinking about how, so this is a movement for you away from dance and into presenting your work in a different way. Charlotte, do you want to just give us a quick overview of the podcast, and then I think we might get to hear a bit of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we are dance artists predominantly making work in a studio, and then the pandemic came into action, and we transferred that kind of artistic streak onto creating a podcast, a totally new medium to us. And it was great for us to start the podcast because it enabled us and the listeners to learn from our guest journeys, and provided a resource and practical support for people with dyslexia, and for those who are neurotypical, who may have been interested in the range of guests within the series, but also looking to understand dyslexia for the benefit of their children or colleagues, and so on. We were definitely really empowered and motivated by all of our guest stories. It was a huge learning curve for Elizabeth and ourselves personally, and particularly former principal dancer of the Royal Ballet, Darcy Bustle. And I think we've got a clip from episode 9, which she's featured on here.
So it's about a minute, this clip, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always like to be quite proactive when it comes to something that is presumed as negative. So I always like to use the difficulties in my life constructively and make the best of that time. And I think I don't want to say that dyslexia has been this annoyance and this thing that's given me a bit of pain. It's made me who I am. So it's been a bit of it's a friend. It's a friend that's empowered me to be who I am. To listen.
Great. So I'm very mindful of the time. We've got lots to get in. Is there anything particular about the making of the podcast that really struck you as helpful or useful, as an experience that you'd want to share with other people?
Yeah, I think, it was really important to us to work with a predominantly dyslexic team, and that presented an opportunity for us to discuss each other's experiences and be able to fuel that into the work, both from a practical, a process perspective as well as a product, thinking about the message that we're putting out there, but also looking at behind the scenes at how to make the process really accessible, but also from an artistic point of view, really thinking about creating a theatrical setting, or elements that we would approach a choreography. I think we definitely approach this as a choreography, combining all these elements, almost looking at the guests as a cast of dancers. And when we heard the guests' stories, we paired music to enhance the narrative, and the music supported the tonality of the story, which hopefully allowed for a dyslexia-friendly learning environment. But one of my particular vivid memories from the podcast is that we had a show and tell section where a guest brought an item that best represents or aids their dyslexia. And we also used our previous dance and dyslexia research and presented an exchange with ballroom dancers AJ and Curtis Pritchard, which people could remotely join these Latin American and contemporary based dance tasks within the episode. So for us, we were always looking at the fact that our podcast is called Move Beyond Words, but we wanted to use dance as a way to move beyond the words and always try and channel this this kind of influence into the podcast whilst using digital. So that was something that we really felt we could continue moving throughout the creation of the podcast. Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a question which I'm just going to put to you, so if you have a chance, either of you, to answer this, really, how did you build the confidence to take your work out there publicly and engage about neurodiversity?
Wow, that's actually really relevant. I think at the beginning of the creation of the podcast, I would hardly ever say that I am dyslexic. And it was a huge process within itself. And I think Elizabeth and I shared the same experience, where suddenly publicly speaking about dyslexia and using our art to kind of as a vehicle to explore that was really special. But I think there's something that Darcy says in that in that snippet, which is, you know, basically don't shy away from yourself and be who you are. And I think what's really supportive is using art to explain this message. And digital was this really great platform where we could continue these conversations through this lockdown.
Yeah. Lovely, thank you very much. Do you want to just speak very briefly about Unboxed as well? I think Elizabeth was going to do that. Just give us a flavour of that, and then I think what we might do is give people the link so they can watch it in the break rather than playing a bit of it. So we can just give us a feel for that, because that's a sort of real evolution for you in your work.
Yeah, definitely. So we've been researching how we could create and generate dyslexia-friendly choreography for ourselves and dance artists who identify with the label of dyslexia. And we've been doing that through a research and development with the Arts Council. And prior to COVID-19, we were going to create a pilot documentary which was looking at dance and dyslexia. And it was part of a commission that we had with the V&A, kind of celebrating their, part of their dance festival, which was celebrating the Royal Academy of Dance's centenary. But obviously that plan got scuppered with the pandemic and we had to adapt quickly. So we changed the concept and kind of restructured what we were going to do with a film, but continued with a film. And we decided to create Unboxed, which kind of encapsulated this research that we'd been discovering over the years prior. And the movement within the film was rehearsed on 4 Zoom sessions and 2 socially distanced live rehearsals. So kind of the process made us really, this new process made us reflect on our communication methods, as working with this digital element added just such a massive new dimension to sharing our work. So yeah, the kind of the way that we generated the choreography for this was kind of leaning into the skill sets of being dyslexic. So we used a lot of like imagery based tasks for the dancer to work within. And then we kind of created sensory experiences. And then we also sectioned the choreography off into sections of colours, just to make it easier to recall which section we're talking about. And then we would offer our kind of corrections or new material which related to that colour. So yeah, just kind of really leaning into the kind of skill sets of those who have dyslexia. And yeah, can I quickly talk about the music? Or yeah,
really quickly, and then music will move us nicely to Andrew. So yes.
So yeah, the music was composed by Tony Watchmaku and was created through lots of open conversations around our lived experiences. And the music Tony created for this piece had evolved from a commission we had with the Royal Opera House. And we talked at length about what it feels like to be inside the mind of someone with dyslexia. And we kept coming back to this thought process of being like a pinball machine. It was quick, impulsive, and scattered. And so we played with that. And we also played with the idea that life's a game and that you have to learn how to play it. And so that was all encapsulated in the movement. And there were so many metaphorical aspects to the music, like the synthetic sounds in conjunction with the organic, and why this was, but I could spend so much time talking about it, Linda, so I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you very much. So I think what we've had some questions in chat. So when you're finished talking, you might want to have a look at the chat, both of you, and see if there's particular questions in there that you could answer generally to everybody that way. There's so much to include. And we'll come back to the questions of communication, working with other people who understand you or don't understand you, which I think is a lot of what Andrew and Corey are going to speak about. So I'll get you back in now afterwards. So we're now going to go, so you can turn your cameras off now, and I'm going to ask Andrew to join us. And Andrew Hugill is, as we said, a composer and a creative technologist. So hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Hello. So just, will you give us a very quick setup to your work, and then we'll play the, because you have one of the BBC's Culture in Quarantine commissions this year, don't you?
Yes, indeed. So yeah, so the commission is for actually 7 short pieces called Spectrum Sounds. I'm autistic. I also have severe hearing loss, thanks to Meniere's disease and a balance condition too. So several invisible disabilities. And these 7 pieces are created really partly out of lockdown, but also out of the way I hear things. So there are several elements to this. One is this autistic ability to focus in on detail and to really hear sounds that probably other people don't always notice. But also synesthesia. So I've been synesthetic all my life. Synesthesia is where, for example, you see a color and you hear a sound, or you hear a sound and you see a color, or taste. I get a bit of a mixture. So the spectrum here refers to the autistic spectrum, but also to the color spectrum. So the 7 pieces relate to the colors of the spectrum, very simply. And each piece is about 3 minutes long.
Okay, so we've got a compilation, which is about a minute in total, which is sections that you've chosen from each of these. So we were just going to play that to give everybody a chance to get a sense of the kind of music that you create. And there's images that go with them, isn't there? So
Yeah.
are we able to now play that? Thank you. That's lovely. So you've said to me before that you think that digital is fundamental to your work. What does digital allow you to do that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise?
Well, I say it's fundamental to my work because I both use it as a tool, but I also think in a digital way. So it's conception, it's the process, and of course it's the dissemination and output. And we see this from the lockdown. You know, the whole dissemination system is largely digital. But to give a couple of specific examples of things that I can do with digital that I couldn't do in any other possible way. One of those pieces you just heard, the piece with piano sounds called Verdigrade, uses actually 2 pianos. One is a normal piano, a typical grand piano, and the other one is an instrument that I've built digitally that reproduces exactly what I hear when a normal piano is played. And I don't think it would be possible to do this mechanically, or I mean, maybe it would be possible, it'd be extremely difficult to do. So, you know, the problem is that I have a thing called diploacusis, where I hear two different notes. So if someone plays one note on a piano, I actually hear two different notes that are out of tune with each other. And the amount of detuning varies across the keyboard. I mean, there's also hearing loss as well. So sort of low end frequencies I can't really hear. But it's this detuning. So I was able to build an instrument with the computer that I could then use musically. Another example is just about going into the interior of a sound. And I mentioned, you know, the autistic listening, being able to hear detail. So I tend to sort of use the computer to do what's called spectral analysis. And it's that word spectrum again. So you look at the structure of a sound, the spectral set of frequencies, and you can not only analyze the sound, but also manipulate the sound using the computer. So I do both those things, but I tend to combine these with as you hear, with acoustic sounds. So, you know, more familiar musical sounds, and indeed natural sounds. So like at the end there, you heard a rook and a cello. This is a typical combination, but there's quite a lot of digital manipulation going on there, but it just sounds like a rook and a cello.
So you're using digital technology to create the sounds, but you also, I suppose, as Charlotte and Elizabeth were talking about, the sort of the communication, the process of making digital is important to you in that as well, isn't it? And how you work with different artists.
Yeah, so all the musicians I've worked with on this project either are autistic or have a hearing condition, or both. Although we do have one who is neither autistic nor has a hearing condition. So I've been working with them digitally. They've been recording locally, sending me sound files. To give you one example, Anya Ustajewski, who I work with, she's plays the flute and she's also a composer. And because she and I both have also hyperacusis, so we're very sensitive to certain sounds, we wanted to create some music that both of us could enjoy. So, so I sent her a load of sound files. She then decided which one she could tolerate and which one she liked and didn't like. She then recorded some responses on her flute to each of those, sent them back to me. I then processed that sound and added more sound, and so on and so on. And we had a kind of a dialogue going on, but we didn't physically meet at all. This was all done digitally.
Yeah, which I guess is a benefit to you.
Well, there are many ways in which I like lockdown. Social distancing I've been practicing for all my life, so I quite enjoy it, and being able to control my environment. And I think this is key for autistic people. So much of it is to do with the environment, you know. So the digital enables me to control that, and then helping my listening too. I'm at a stage now where I can only listen to music for a few minutes at a time. It becomes painful to listen to it for very long. So I'm trying to move to more short form composition, but also the process of, you know, making music now. I've gone from a kind of live co-located performance type situation much more to a sort of asynchronous model where I can share material, make music, but there's time for me to adjust the listening environment.
I'm going to bring the others back in now, and wondered whether Elizabeth or Charlotte or Corey, you had any sort of, listening to Andrew speaking about his process and how he works, whether there's anything that resonates with you in all of that. I don't know if anybody has any comments to add there. Maybe the audience as well. Elizabeth, did you want to, have you got something to add to that?
Just that it's fascinating to hear how you've created, what was the process of actually creating the piano, you know, how you hear it. I can't quite get my head around how you've done that.
So I can explain. I'll try and make it as quick and easy as possible to understand. So basically, I realized that I was hearing two different notes. That was the first thing. So there was a perceptual thing just from listening to piano music. So if someone plays Mozart, it begins to sound more like Stockhausen to me, you know, because it quite quickly becomes quite muddy and distorted. So then what I did was I just, first of all, would sing a note. So I'd cover up my really bad ear with wax, sing a note or play a note, sing it back and record my singing and then check it against a pitch meter. And what I found with my good ear was that because I'm an excellent musician and my pitching is very good, I was always in tune in that ear. When I did the reverse process with my bad ear, I could see the detuning, but I could also measure how much detuning there was. And what I found was that with each note on the piano, the amount of detuning varied. So it wasn't like there was a consistent out of tuneness going down. And sometimes it varies by up to a minor third, which is quite a big musical interval in terms of the amount of detuning. And then it gets even more complicated because as you go down to the bottom end of the piano, because I have low frequency hearing loss, which is typical of Meniere's disease, what I hear is the harmonics above the fundamental note, not the fundamental note. And then those harmonics are heard as with diplacusis as well. So I'm then hearing the harmonic field distorted. So I then have to try and measure that. And that got really very complicated. But you see, I mean, it's an interesting combination, this, of autistic hearing because and this hearing loss, because my autistic hearing was always very, very detailed. So like I hear electricity, for example, you know, I'd listen to the motorway and write down, I used to sit by the side of the road and notate the vehicles going past, you know. So I was hearing this kind of level of detail. And when I conducted orchestras, I would hear each individual instrument and be able to tell them, you know, what they were doing wrong. So I've got that kind of hypersensitivity, but then with the hearing loss now, I've got this distortion to the hypersensitivity. So it's made it very difficult to live with. But somebody said earlier, and I heartily agree, is that you take these things and you make them into a creative, you know, you respond creatively. So what I wanted to do was to try and find a way back to composition. It's been about 10 years since I've been able to write any music, really. I mean, I've done a bit, but you know, not much. And I've kind of found a way back now, and this is all to do with the digital technology, found a way back now to being able to write music again. And so I'm sort of at the point now where I'm feeling like a composer. I wake up in the morning with musical ideas in my head, which used to happen every day when I was younger, but now, but then I went through this period where it didn't happen because there was such a dislocation between my brain and my ears, you know. But I'm sort of getting back there again.
I'm going to interrupt you because it's fantastic, and there's a really sort of lovely story here about thinking about how digital works and supports you, and also, as you were saying, sort of really capitalizing on your particular strengths to make your work and tapping into that, which echoes what Elizabeth and Charlotte were saying. I'm going to bring Corey in at this point, so we haven't heard from Corey yet. So thank you, Corey. Are you there? Do you want to appear? Hello. So we're talking about process, and I think we'll come back to this question at the end. But the other thing that we wanted to speak about, and I think is kind of coming through strongly from everybody, was the idea of how you get your work made. And as a choreographer, we're going to, you know, you've worked a lot with the space, Corey. You've created 2 or 3 beautiful pieces, including Antarctica and the Swan Lake Bath Ballet, which we'll put the links into chat so people can watch them in the break, which is coming next. But, you know, and you've reached huge audiences with both of these beautiful digital dance works. And so we really wanted to sort of think about how you've got to a really good place in your career, is what I'm saying. And as have the others. You said to me that it's taken you years to figure out what you need to support your environment and to make others aware of how to support you. So how have you done that? Have you created that support for yourself?
Yeah, great question. I think the environment thing is really important to understand. And I have to say that I don't, even though I will talk very much now in a way that's hopefully helpful in some specific elements, it does always change and it's never the same from day to day, or you know, I still am learning and discovering. But something that Charlotte and Elizabeth said earlier about a pinball machine, I think is absolutely genius. I've used similar analogies, but I think this is a genius one. And I would say that my mind is always like in a pinball machine, possibly one of those ones that has those two balls going at one time. And I can often find that if I'm not in an environment that supports those balls bouncing around. So for example, right now I'm in a very sort of, I'm in a hotel quarantining, and it's very sort of white and basic, and it stresses me out. I know that I personally need to be in quite a busy environment in order to allow my mind to get the best out of what's going on. I also know that sometimes it gets a bit too much, and then I need to calm and switch it off. And I find that really hard to do. And there's only a certain few things that I've really learned that can do that for me, like exercise and running, yoga, speaking to a friend and just sort of talking something out very calmly and clearly, going to the cinema where it's a very controlled environment. And so there are sort of exterior environments and things to do. When it comes to working, I very much can't work on one thing for longer than probably 20 to 30 minutes. And that's being massaged over years in order to do that. I have to, sorry, to be specific, I'm talking about documentation types of working now, so paperwork and things like that. If you ever look, I'm not going to share my screen now, but if you saw it, you'd see 700 different tabs open and a scattered desktop that would probably give a lot of people hives. It's very, lots of different things at any one time. And that's because I'm trying to constantly stimulate myself with something new, and that is how I'm most productive.
And how do you make demands on other people to
very
particularly
easily
using, you know, how do you make demands on other people, and how does digital help you? Those are the questions, really. Because other people, we've had questions from the audience saying, well, how do I find a way of working? What would you, from what you've experienced, what would your suggestions be to others?
Mm-hmm. I know that I often miss gaps. Like I love using sort of the Richard Branson. I have ADHD and dyslexia, so I enjoy the Richard Branson story here of how he also has ADHD and dyslexia, and he can, you know, he has a well, we all know who Richard Branson is. And he talks quite articulately about how he's able to see lots of different things and has lots of different visions and go from the macro to the huge very quickly. And I feel like my mind does that, but I often along the way miss some very fundamental gaps or some communication or the human story within individuals within that. And so within the people that I work with, and the teams that I'm in or I assemble, I think it's quite clear, and I'm clear about that, the sort of detail is very important because that's often where I miss. On the flip side, I can be incredibly detailed and neurotic, borderline neurotic, when I feel like I'm not, when I'm aware of the dyslexia and ADHD getting in the way, when I know, okay, I'm struggling on this document or I'm struggling on this piece or whatever it might be, then I can tell that I'll go in really hard on it. And so I have really asked people to talk to me about where I'm at on something, really, and have that open conversation. And then from there, understand, does this need more analyzing, or am I am I shifting to something else? Does this need to be talked about? Does this need to be ironed out? Does that make any sense? I don't know.
It does. Okay. But I'm wondering as well, so you're in a position of influence, as the choreographer, you're directing. And were you always able to be that way? I mean, being able to, or, if you're new into your career, I'm asking the question because that's the question we've been asked about people sort of finding their way as an artist in the first place. How do you find the strength or the confidence to make those demands on the world?
I don't know how to answer that question because I don't know if it's connected to, I suspect it must be, but I don't know how it is connected to my dyslexia or ADHD. But what I do know is that I feel very confident and creative. I feel very confident in my creativity. And something that, again, Charlotte and Elizabeth said earlier on, is that there is a connection between, I really notice it in dyslexic and ADHD people in the arts, because I might be looking at 30 people on stage doing really unique patterns, and I can notice if someone's pinky's out of line, and that's how my mind works. I can look at 500 different things and take it in, and find that moment. When it comes to a document, I can't tell if the or and is spelt correctly. It's just a different thing that's working up there. In the creative field, I can feel that and I identify that my mind works really well, and it's the strongest it can be in creating and in that space. And I love it. And so, and it can't, yeah. And so I think there's a confidence that comes with that. Naturally from doing it more and more, and now knowing that the ADHD and dyslexia actually supports that, and I think is responsible for the successes that I've had in that. Then it was about figuring out, how do I have confidence in the world of producing and documentation and all of the other boring stuff that comes with that world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. I'm going to take a sort of slight segue, but again, it's a question that we've been asked in advance, and I'm going to ask the others the same question too, which is, it's really about finding an audience for your work. How can neurodivergent people market themselves? And again, I'm not asking you to answer for everybody, but from your own experience, how can neurodivergent people market themselves and their work? And then I'm going to ask the others if they have an experience to comment on there.
I personally don't see myself different to anyone else or create specific work from an artist who isn't. I would say my strengths are, I would say that my dyslexia and ADHD definitely have strengths in my creativity, as I've said. And I think that's what makes me an artist that's able to connect to lots of audiences. That's me. I also understand that there's a point of going, hey, I need help and I need support and I need to market myself in that way to get across the hurdle of feeling like you can't operate in this world. I think that is about communication and talking and letting people know that. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's see if anybody, Charlotte, do you have Elizabeth's here, sorry. Charlotte, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, oh my goodness, there's so much. My notes are so scattered, Coria. Yes, there's no correlation between the two. But you said something, you said, talk to me. I think something about evaluating a process or looking in, and I think we can all, by the sounds of it, we're all speaking about our processes. We're all quite analytical. We're striving to be perfectionists, and we can really kind of look in at the detail. So, Linda, about your question about marketing, how we'd market ourselves and our work, I completely agree with you, Corey, is that like highlighting our strengths and changing the perception of what dyslexia is, so people also understand those strengths. And it really is like, we can talk to you, but come talk to us. I think that's a really great point, is that there's this exchange in understanding. And I know that Elizabeth has an access rider, and so does Andrew. And it's something that I really want to kind of figure more out about myself and what my needs are in order to kind of market what I need and what also my strengths are. So that's something that is on my to-do list. But yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just wondering about who you work with and how you get your work out there. Is there anything else particular that you think Elizabeth that might be a question?
Oh, sorry, go on, Charlie. Have you got?
No, go ahead, Liz. Yeah.
I was just going to say that everyone's process is different, and I think where I used to work as a performer predominantly, and there came a point where I had to look at dyslexia to continue in the creative industry. And you picked up on it there, Corey, of like, you know, you don't make work around your dyslexia, but it's kind of there. And I think, you know, everyone's process is different. And I definitely had to make work around dyslexia to understand it for myself because I didn't have the words. And so through that process, I've been able to understand what my strengths and weaknesses are. And I think in marketing yourself, it's being open and honest about that experience so that we can all learn from one another.
Thank you. Let's see if Andrew's got. Andrew, do you have any thoughts about how you find an audience for your work?
I have to confess, I found this immensely difficult. I have had quite a good audience for my work, but I've never worked, for example, in a commercial way. And even in the sort of arts sector, the problem, of course, is that this requires networking, and that requires constant engagement with other people in situations that are often difficult and challenging for me as an autistic person. So so my career has, you know, I've had quite a lot of commissions. I've been performed around the world off and on, but I think probably as a marketing exercise, it's been pretty much a disaster because I've failed to market myself very successfully at all. Because I can't, you know, this networking business is such a challenge. And I think, you know, somebody said earlier there is a change taking place, and I think there is. You know, I think people are becoming more aware of this, and so I think people are listening better now than they were. So that's encouraging, and I guess this commission is an example that I'm not totally invisible. You know, I do seem to be able to arouse some interest in my work, even so. But I mean, to give you an example, you know, I very rarely apply for anything because the process of applying for things, competitions, judging panels, all that kind of stuff, I almost never do. I think I've done 3 in my entire life, basically.
It's interesting that, because Elizabeth and Charlotte speak about that as well, how some of those processes get in your way, don't they? And I think in the second part of the webinar, we'll really be thinking about how what organisations can do differently in order to support you. But just before we finish up with this session, is there anything does anybody have any other comments really that have come out of this that you just wanted to share? Anything that you've been thinking about from what each other have said? Just wave if something else you wanted to add in. Oh, go on. Corey, you go first.
I just think for me, essentially, it's about having confidence in, and you know, Darcy said it in your podcast, Charlotte and Elizabeth. It's about, for me, celebrating difference and understanding your difference and knowing that it's actually maybe not different. And that there's a lot of people out there going through the same thing and experiencing it. And I think the you know, whatever your process is on trying to find out how your mind works, it takes years. I mean, as I said, I'm still figuring it out. And that's if you've got ADHD, dyslexia, or if you don't, you know, your life journey is about figuring out, how does this whole thing work? Why does it work like that? Why is it thinking that? How do I best use it? Get the, you know, how do I stimulate or understand or relax this muscle? And there's lots of support out there, and then there's also not. And I think there is a lot of support out there, but I think you can feel like there's not. And I think the talking and communicating and reading, ironically, or listening to podcasts is the way forward, and that it should be a positive stigma, because it is.
A positive stigma. Thank you. Elizabeth, did you want to add any comments, really?
Yeah, just some practical resources, really. There's the Access Rider that Charlotte mentioned, which was designed by Alexandrina Hemsley. And that's a great tool to working with new collaborators, to write down where you need support and where your strengths are and how to manage weaknesses. And so that's a great resource. And I'm still, have to be honest, in the process of sharing that. There's a, it's difficult. And I think it takes time to get the confidence up to kind of share that openly with new collaborators, but something that I'm going through and definitely recommend it, because it does make communication much more clearer for everyone involved. And it means that the work can be the focus rather than any miscommunications that might be happening within the team. And then there's Access to Work, which most people might know about. Access to Work is something that the government supports people who have what they would consider a disability. And there's lots of different support that they provide, including coaching, different tools and softwares, and different tech that can help as well. So definitely recommend that.
So we can put a link to that into the chat. And is there anything digital in particular that you think is helpful?
There's so many things. I mean, Zoom as a real foundation, that is really helpful. There's something called Speech Appy, which dictates your speech.
I think it's called Speechify, or maybe not.
Speechify. Yeah, I think there's two. There's Speech Appy and Speechify, and yeah, I think there are a couple that spring to mind, and I'll post some things in the chat if I think of others.
Thank you. And I'll come to Andrew briefly, and then we'll just need to finish up on this session. Andrew, is there anything that you've heard from what the others have said that sparked a thought in you that you might like to share?
Well, just regarding the audience, someone's posted in the chat about this Neurodiversity network that I started a few years ago now, and has now got AHRC funding. And what we found with that, we put on some concerts. These were concerts by people with hearing difference for audiences who also hear differently. And what we found was a completely new audience starting to turn up for these events, because suddenly they were accessible in a way that concerts normally are not. I mean, I never go to concerts. You know, I can't tolerate the music, the environment. But these concerts were quite different. You know, the whole listening, the way you listen was different. You had different technologies, vibrating floors, signing, video interpretation, all kinds of ways of approaching the music, which wasn't just, you know, sitting in a room being forced to listen to whatever someone decided you should listen to. Yeah.
So maybe we're thinking about how people can think about this differently and use being very specific, interesting things that come out of it that might be valuable. Go on, Corey, and then we'll finish up.
I forgot to also say this obvious one. Well, I think it's obvious now, but when I started doing it, I was like, how come I've never done this before? But I've recently started with my team or recording our Zooms about a funding application or a document when we're talking it out, and we'll record it so that then someone can write it, or even I can come back and write it, so that I think often we get impatient with our own mind because it's gone like this, and then it's really hard to grab onto that and put it into the written word. And so having a recorded session on that with other people, and then using that for yourself, other people to write from, I think is really helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll take a 5-minute break now. Thank you all very much for your contributions so far. In the break, if anybody's got questions for the panelists, would you like to add them into the chat? And then I'll ask people to look at those when we come back from the break. And we're going to put links into Corey's Swan Lake Bath Ballet, which you might want to watch, and also to the Move Beyond Words Unboxed film, which is also very beautiful. So they'll both be available. We're just going to have a 5-minute break so you don't have to look at the screen, and then we'll start again at 12:05 with looking at what organisations could be doing differently in order to become more accessible to artists and performers and audiences. Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so we're ready to start again on the second part of the webinar, and I'm going to introduce Becky Morris, and she'll be joined shortly by Andrew Hugill. So Becky is a consultant working in the heritage sector with museums and other organisations, really thinking about how they can become more accessible. And so here, I guess what we're hearing earlier is we've heard from choreographers and musicians, and really this is thinking about, so that's very performance based. What else is going on, and how can we learn, how can performance learn from museums, museums from performance, and so on. So Becky, do you want to start by giving us a flavour of the kind of work you do?
Oh yes, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Linda, for your kind invitation to be part of the panel today, and also in terms of the opportunity to tell everyone sort of what we're up to at DCN and also at Embed. So in terms of what we do, I founded DCN in 2015. Primarily because it took me a day and a half to find resources in regards to access and inclusion. And I've been in the sector now for almost 25 years. Where did it go? And the key thing is part of that was it took me a day and a half to find resources. And I got so fed up about it that my colleagues at my job said to me, why don't you do something? And we launched the website for DCN in 2015. We always said, though, that heritage has a habit of talking to heritage when it comes to solutions and practitioner style opportunities. Heritage talks to heritage in regards to what those solutions could be and how they can be potentially managed with competitive funding streams and also in terms of particular influences. However, what we said was that we would talk to other sectors in regards to what they do to support neurodivergent and disabled people themselves, and also in terms of what that practice is. Are there any gaps? Are there any key opportunities that we can learn from and collaborate with in terms of creating an equitable, diverse and inclusive workforce, but also in terms of how that can cascade into working practice and the customer experience. And that's where our partnership with Embed came about. So with Embed, we're a consortium of globally experienced practitioners and thought leaders in regards to EDI. And we've been working together to support all organisations, no matter their budget or their situation, in respect to what EDI can be to them, and also in terms of how it can inform practice to create a sustainable and inclusive sector.
What does EDI stand for?
Equality, diversity and inclusion. That's the one. Now, the key thing is that I'm neurodivergent and I'm late diagnosis dyspraxic. So you'll see me often smiling, and I may just do this rather a lot because I'm very passionate about neurodivergent people working in heritage. I'm a board member of Achievability, which is a neurodivergent-led group of wonderful people who not only look at research, but collaboration in regards to the inclusive workplace. We also work in respect to sharing ideas and conversations about the conversation around neurodiversity as well, of identity, and also in terms of work. I'm also part of the Dyslexia Adult Network, which is a group of people who are instigators and leaders around neurodiversity, particularly in respect to dyslexia, but also in terms of where this sits in regards to policy. So things like access to work. And the key thing is with all of this is how it feeds into heritage and the arts. So one of the things that I do as well is I work with neurodivergent adults who can't afford diagnosis. We know it costs £750 for a dyslexia diagnosis via an educational psychologist. So I support adults with screening and strategies coaching to support them, particularly if they're within the benefit system, to just give them some leverage in going forward so they don't feel so stuck.
Can you tell us a bit about the kinds of things that, you know, from what you've learned from your work, that organisations can do to support audiences?
Oh, definitely. So the key thing is, first and foremost, we know that neurodiversity is we're part of a spectrum. I know that, I know you guys know that, but also that we're cross-profile. So I'm dyslexic, but there is also times when I've really got deep dived into a report and I think to myself, do you know what? I do wonder if I've got a little bit of ADHD in there. So it's about understanding about how we're cross-profile. And there's research and statistics that back that up by the WAC report, which is the Westminster Achievability Commission, and also the research of Mary Coley. So there's a lot in terms of how we can learn from the spectrum that is neurodiversity and not singular profiles. The second thing in relation to that, in terms of digital, is that from my own experience, we know that we have audiences out there who are functionally illiterate, which is just horrific when you think about it in 2021. And also that as part of that, it's about 1 in 6 adults. There will be particular triggers and situations in respect to how they feel emotionally in a world where it's text-based practice. So in terms of museums, I support organisations in understanding more about multisensory practice, but also learning styles in terms of tactile and other forms of interpretation. And one of those is digital. So the idea being that, can you create an app or an opportunity through text-to-speech support to support people who have literacy difficulties? What is the situation in terms of digital skills in respect to literacy difficulties? Because we know for a fact through work through Cambridge University that, I've got the stat right here, here we are, it's about 22% of the UK population lack digital skills, and this was before COVID. So when it comes to our audiences themselves, we've already established 2 key barriers. One potential key barrier is illiteracy caused by potential no diagnosis neurodiversity profile. The second one is how that can influence people in terms of affordability of the internet, but also in terms of what that practice looks like. But then there's an opportunity in respect to that digital can be used where text won't necessarily work. So for people with scotopic sensitivity syndrome, known as ARLANS, if you have an app or an audio guide with some text-to-speech software on it, you're already looking at supporting people with literacy difficulties, as well as how people interpret the written word in terms of information processing.
So we're talking about sort of some of the things that organisations can do would be thinking about, how do you put your content out there in ways other than written?
Exactly, yes. And another key factor in all of that, so you've got your written, you've got opportunities to use digital in terms of graphic interpretation, like a comic book. There is so much out there at the moment. It's more about pulling in resources that are meaningful to your organisation, but also have them as a consistently developmental tool to enable that your resources themselves reflect what your audience needs are. So in terms of good software that you've used in the past, whether it be mind mapping, comic creations, for want of a better word, it all creates that story around objects and people, but also in terms of that delivery to attract and say, come and see us, come and be part of our organisation, because we understand and we want to create that authentic conversation as well.
So something about the spirit of it, and when organisations work with you, it's important that they are open to thinking about how they can use digital to make everything more accessible.
This is it, because there's also fundamental factors, particularly within museums that love their wooden floorboards. So if you've got any kind of sensory processing difficulty, I've got that myself, being dyspraxic, that if you've got wooden floors and chairs and people are bashing around on this, and it always sounds louder, doesn't it, folks? But in the end, you have this whole situation where captions will reduce that risk of distractibility. It reduces the anxiety and it engages the audience. So in terms of captions, it's one of those things that is such a key deliverable in terms of sensory processing, and also looking at your environment as well. There's some museums I've worked with who have got the most gorgeous windows, absolutely full of light, with really good choices in blinds. So then when it comes to natural light, it can support people, but also in terms of that environment itself. So those captions, whether they're on a reflective surface, they can still be engaged with. So it's about that flexibility as such, and digital having a really core part of that, not only in terms of visitor information, in terms of getting to your organization and what you look like on your website, but also reaching out, because it's important that any organization goes across towards website accessibility to WCAG 2.1 AA, which is the website's standards of good practice. That in itself will support a number of audiences in terms of the commitment of the organisation for inclusive practice, recognition of neurodiversity, but also in terms of working on key barriers to open up the doors to ensure that people come to their museum, particularly now.
So we've talked a bit about, accessibility web-wise and some of the other things that organisations can do, and I'm going to bring Andrew back in as well. So we've had questions from people in our audience, one from a library service and one from Coventry City of Culture, saying, what else can we do for neurodiverse people? What would be a piece of advice you'd give to an organisation who's thinking, how do we become more accessible to a neurodivergent audience and to performers and artists and contributors? So I'll ask you first, Becky, and then Andrew might have an extra element to add to that.
So one of those key things is that obviously we're on a spectrum, and it's important that any organisation creates an authentic opportunity to create a conversation between the person and the organisation itself. So we do things at DCN and Embed called a passport, which is about supporting the employer as well as the employee. And with the passport, it's about an authentic conversation, which is confidential, but it supports everybody within the team. Now, the reason why I say everybody is because we're all intersectional. So you may be picking up your kids at 3 p.m. and then having to rush back to the office for whatever reason. If you're being held up in traffic, it's about creating those systems in place to reduce anxiety, so then neurodivergent people don't feel tested. Or if I'm not 100% brilliant all the time, then I've got a problem, and what am I going to do about it? So it's about creating that authentic conversation.
Lovely, thank you. Andrew, when you've said to me that you work with arts organisations sometimes to and art centres to help them to think about diversity. Is there anything that you particularly pick out as and using digital that would be a helpful approach?
Yes, there's loads. Yeah, I'm on the advisory board of the Attenborough Arts Centre in Leicester, and I've also been advising Phoenix Arts Centre. I tend to approach things from an autistic perspective, so I'm looking at that, but a lot of what I say will apply to other neurodivergences or disabilities as well. And the good news is that actually the changes that need to be made are often quite minor and quite simple. And the other thing is that what we've observed is that neurotypical people like the changes that are made to benefit neurodivergent people. So, we all like spaces that have adjustable lighting. We all like spaces that aren't crowded and noisy. We all like spaces where we feel more human, more relaxed. So the digital side, I beg your pardon, let's just stop that. The digital side is absolutely the same as the physical side, as far as I'm concerned. So there's a formula that Luke Bearden has, which is environment plus autism equals outcome. And our environment here is digital as well as physical. So, for example, a really simple thing you could do is to provide a video of what it's like to arrive at your centre and to walk through the centre. This is a really simple idea. If you look at a lot of airports, they do this now, and the anxiety levels that get reduced dramatically by that, and it's quite easy to do. Likewise, you want to think about things like, for me, if I can't see the corners of the room, so if you have a big space, how are you going to navigate that if you've got a problem with your proprioception, your vestibular system? You can't locate yourself physically in the space. Then you need to think about things like smells. So where's the cafe in relation to the seating area? Are the toilets too near to the place where the public go? Because I'm allergic to most perfumes, for example. I just have a complete meltdown. Sorry, you want to cut in? There are so many more things to say.
And I'm thinking, it's like you said, the physical, the digital, they really they cross over, don't they? And we're thinking about how can digital really help. So we're sort of thinking about some of the things that organisations can do in the practical way. And I'm going to bring our other panellists back, because we're sort of going to think about also creatively, how can digital help creatively? How can digital support? And I wanted to we're coming to the end of the webinar, really, just give everybody a chance to think about what change, whether this is creatively or practically, what change would you like to happen for to make work and the arts more open to neurodivergent people and artists? And I'm going to start with Charlotte. What one change would you like to see?
Oh, I was worried you're going to start with me. I have to think quick. No, I think there's so much to reflect on today, Becky, especially what you're saying. It's fascinating. But for me, it's really the visibility of those resources, especially I can empathise with a lot of people with searching. And that's something that's really on Elizabeth's and our agenda for Move Beyond Words, and bringing those resources to artists especially. But if anything, the last year and a half, maybe 2 years, has taught us to adapt, to reflect, to change. And just like Andrew said, sometimes if you adapt your methods to suit neurodiverse people, you actually might enjoy them more so yourself. So I think this openness to change is highly necessary, so for the benefit of everyone.
Thank you. And Corey, what change would you like to see?
Oh, I don't even know if this is definitely for ADHD and dyslexic, anyone. I think it's for the wider world as well of art. I heard City of Culture there asking, and and others as well. I just think a really good practice is to reply to your emails, keep them short, keep comms clear, and don't ask artists to give loads of time on treatments and budgets if you're not interested in, and you're never going to reply. It's a lot of hard work, unpaid work for artists to do. So if you are interested in an artist's work, I think there's a change of protocol to maybe, the Zooms and phone calls are really helpful to have this in-person chat for a lot of people, not everyone, and start that relationship. And then I think if you want to take it to the next level, then maybe even offering artists a payment or support in developing treatments and budgets, because there's a lot of time and energy that goes into that that's often just sidelined by the big organizations that are on paid salaries.
Okay, thank you very much. And Becky, what change would you like to see?
I think the narrative sectorially needs to change. I know that there's a lot of emphasis on individual change makers, when actually the sector has a responsibility to make sure that everyone thrives within it, and that everyone who makes a choice to work in the arts, whether it be museums, creative industries, has that opportunity to be themselves, but also in terms of thrive within those environments. And if they can't thrive at the moment, what is that roadmap to get us there? because one of the things that I found particularly incredible when I worked with organisations like Universal Music was that they literally said, we want you. We recognise the strengths that neurodivergent people have, and we will change our practice to ensure that people thrive within our workplaces and in our practice. And that in itself, just saying that with the actions with it, is a commitment and a statement to move forward. And I feel that that is particularly now what everybody's said. I completely agree with you, Charlotte, Elizabeth, Corey and Andrew. This is about actually what informs practice, recognising the diversity of neurodiversity, but also in terms of what we can learn from the pandemic as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. So we've been thinking a lot about what organisations can do and how to be sort of more open. And just, Andrew, well, there's what we had a question from the audience actually, which I'm going to put to you, which is sort of similar. It's about how do you use your medicalised diagnosis as a creative and innovative strength? What would you say to other people who wanted to do that?
Well, well, this would actually tie also to the answer I would give to your other question. And the word is acceptance. So what would I like to see changed? Acceptance. So there's a lot of talk about awareness, but I think it has to be acceptance. And this applies to yourself as well. So you've got to accept the situation you have, and you've got to start to be creative with it. You've got to accept it. And I found that very hard. I mean, I for about 10 years, for example, the hearing, I kept it a secret, you know, because I think a lot of musicians who have hearing problems do this. You know, it's kind of career suicide. You have to accept the way you are, basically. And so it applies, you know, we need a societal shift towards acceptance of neurodivergence. We also, you personally need to accept yourself to become creative. And then once you've got that acceptance, then you can start to be positive with it. For myself, it's just bloody mindedness. So, you know, each morning I get up and I have my routine and I get on and I have my toast with my marmalade and I won't bore you with the details. And basically that is the day I have to do it.
Okay. So bloody mindedness, that's what's
yeah.
And everybody's laughing and smiling. I'm just going to finish by asking Elizabeth, if you've got a sort of summary of, you know, what, as a Move Beyond Words, as a partner hosts in this webinar, what have you heard today that's really struck you or you'd want to echo?
I think the biggest thing is just the hurdles that we might all be going through silently, and I think just making time and finding the confidence to raise your voice and be open about that, because you'll find that someone else is also going through something that could benefit the situation for everyone if we could just be a bit more open. But Charlotte, I think you had something that you messaged before that would be interesting to just pick up on as well, and the reflections from today.
We've just got 1 minute left.
Oh, with that 1 minute, it's a good opportunity to thank the space. You know, I would say hosting conversations like this, that's been a huge thing to take away from today, learning from each other's experiences, and finding resources, finding strategies to help ourselves and to help organizations. So it's communication and it's continuing these conversations. Yeah, that's my one.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll finish there. Just before we all disappear off, two things. One is that we do have an evaluation form. Hopefully it's not too complicated, and there's an opportunity there to talk, to say what you, how you felt about this particular webinar, but also in the spirit of keeping the communication open, any ideas that anybody has for how we can make the programme more accessible would be much appreciated. And also to say thank you so much to all of you for taking part, and also to our panelists for sharing some of their own experiences and their comments on how they work and how they use digital. So thank you everybody so much for all your generous sharing of your time. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye everybody. And you can turn your cameras and cameras and sound off now if you'd like to.